Hi everyone, this is EchoThemOut Environmental Justice Podcast, and I'm your host for today, Ksenia Bernovska. Without further ado, let's get started. Today we're going to talk about the topic that never becomes old, nuclear weapons, and more precisely, nuclear testing. I'm going to walk you back to decades ago to the Central Asian steppe in Kazakhstan, former Soviet Union Republic. And there, nearby the city Semey, which used to be Semipalatinsk, we will find a research nuclear city, which is called Kurchatov, named after a Soviet Union atomic physicist and engineer. The city never appeared on the map back then, for one particular reason. Nearby, the curious nose could have found a nuclear weapon polygon testing site from Russian. Semipalatinsk test site, comprised in an area of approximately 19,000 square kilometers, where more than 110 atmospheric and 340 underground tests were conducted near the city of Semipalatinsk between 1949 and 1989. Today, about 1 million people have been recognized as victims of nuclear tests at the Semipalatinsk test site. All of them are of Kazakh nationality, coming from Semipalatinsk, Pavlodar, and Karaganda regions. The exact number is not given by any source of information, and moreover, the victims of the tests are not only those who lived back then nearby the test site, but their children, their grandchildren, keep suffering from the radiation effect. After the closure of the site in 1999, children with physical disabilities still continue to be born for a long time till now. Residents reported a lot of suicides, and the terrible diseases are still taking their people away. For example, in 2010, domestic publications wrote about a 7-year-old guy who was suffering from osteogenesis, and because of his disease, his bones were very fragile and could break from a single touch. There are also many stories of how people were born without limbs, with giant tumors all over their bodies, or could not even take a step on their own because of different dysfunctions. The reason for such a massive epidemic is not is that first some of the tests were conducted in the atmosphere, and the second, even if there were a lot of underground tests, but not all of them were conducted safely, and of course they still adversely affected the environment around and the people living around due to the winds that spread radiation and spread the radioactive dust. Besides, according to foreign cultures, the soil of this territory and the territory around the waters, they're still contaminated. And regardless of this fact, people still keep living there because they're very proud to live on their land. The people still remain swimming in the lake, which is a nuclear lake, and even fish there. So people keep suffering. And if now it's clear why Kazakh people suffered from military program of the Soviet Union, back then there was so much secrecy around it, and people didn't know about what kind of risks they were suffering from. All the research that was conducted by the medical unit back then in Semipalatinsk, of course, they were classified, and no one knew about the adverse effects of radiation, and no one knew the spread of that radiation. So no one was raising awareness. Why they chose that? Why they chose Kazakhstan? Why they chose that test site? Well, probably one of the official reasons is the kind of an area that this place had. But what I think personally that the reason was also that Soviets wanted to have the polygons as far as possible from central cities like Moscow or Leningrad, which now is St. Petersburg. And Kazakhstan was a great option. It was more than 3,000 kilometers away from these cities. And overall, Kazakh lobby was quite weak comparing to other regions' lobby in the USSR, so that could also be a rationale. Nowadays, for those who are considered victims, the following reparations and compensations exist: the priority medical help, the pension, the special pension security, and special government allowances of approximately $40 or $50 per month, which is, of course, not a lot. In this episode, we'll have two amazing guests, Alimzhan Akhmetov and Togzhan Kassenova, who were interviewing the survivors, as they prefer to say, of the villages nearby the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site, and they were doing it for their researches. More specifically, Togzhan Kassenova has been working for 15 years to write a book called Atomic Statecraft: How Kazakhstan Gave Up the Bomb, to uncover the Kazakh nuclear history. This book is going to be published next year, and today we're going to talk to them about their experience, their trips to villages, and this kind of research, and the peculiarities and difficulties of this kind of research, and of course the lives of survivors. So please welcome them. Hi, Alimzhan. Thank you very much for joining us today on the EchoThemOut podcast. And Alimzhan Akhmetov is the director of the Center for International Security and Policy from Kazakhstan. Could you please, before we get into the topic about the trip and your research regarding the victims of the nuclear testing in Kazakhstan, can you please just talk a little bit about your background and your research interests? So, what do you do?
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Ksenia, for inviting me for this interview. Very excited to see you. And as you said, I'm a founding director of a non-governmental organization based in Kazakhstan. Actually, I'm a former diplomat and I worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan approximately for 10 years. But then idea came to my mind to organize in Kazakhstan an NGO, which is focused exclusively on disarmament issues, including nuclear disarmament and other issues on international security. So, and I established this organization in 2017. And actually, once I founded this NGO, I took part in negotiations on treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, and in three meetings of the preparatory committee for the review conference of the treaty on non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. And this is actually shortly. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So you have such a vast experience in disarmament issues, and I guess today we're going to talk about more of a nuclear testing issue, which I think is included in the topic of disarmament and just generally nuclear weapons. So without further ado, can you maybe first talk about the background and the purposes of the trip that you had to the families that had suffered from the Semipalatinsk polygon's nuclear testing?
So the idea came spontaneously. Actually, I was thinking about it that as a person who works on nuclear disarmament at UN disarmament fora, but I never traveled myself to the villages around the former Semipalatinsk nuclear testing site. So, but it was pushed by my friend, Dr. Togzhan Kassenova, when we met in New York, and she's now writing her book about Semipalatinsk nuclear test site, former Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. And actually, she asked me if I can help her to organize this visit in order to have interview with local people, as it is needed for her book. And I said, yes, it's a great idea because I'm interested myself to travel to the villages and to talk to people how they live there and to see their life myself. So first, actually, we traveled twice, and every trip we understood that it's never enough because so many people can tell their unique stories. And the first time we traveled in August 2019, and we traveled to several villages around Semipalatinsk city. Now it's called Semey city, actually, in Kazakh.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And where, in which villages did you go, and why did you choose these villages?
So there are several villages which are located around Semipalatinsk test site, and we chose Znamenka village. It's now called Okentau. So Znamenka village located approximately 60 kilometers from Semipalatinsk, from Semey city. Mm-hmm. And also we traveled to Karaul and Sarjal. These villages are known as where people suffered from nuclear tests.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In second trip, we actually had the second trip, which was in November last year, and we traveled. It was like we visited the same families which we met in 2019, and also we tried new villages such as Chegan and Dalony.
Mm-hmm. And did you have any COVID-related problems when you traveled the second time?
Yes, we had to have a test. Entering city and leaving city, we have to have the test that we are not ill with the coronavirus.
Mm. Okay.
And of course, social distancing in the city, etc.
Mm-hmm. And you said that you traveled there together with your friend Togzhan Kassenova. Were you the only two people who were the part of a group, or you had more people traveling to these villages?
Well, in last year we traveled only both of us. Mm-hmm. And in 2019, there were three of us. I had at the time our project manager who worked at the Center for International Security and Policy. So there were three of us: Dr. Togzhan Kassenova, Oleg Butenko, who was the manager of our center, and me. Mm-hmm. And of course, we had to rent a car in Semey. So we had a driver who knew the roads, how to get to the villages.
Mm-hmm. And who was taking interviews? Were all of you taking, or only Togzhan?
It was like the main interviewer was Togzhan Kassenova. The second was me, but Togzhan, she talked more, the most, the person who was a leader in these issues.
Okay, and coming to the organization of your trip, who supported your trip? Was it only your organization who supported your trip, like financially, maybe like in terms of resources, or maybe you had some other external support, maybe from Kazakh government or other organizations, maybe international organizations?
Well, these two trips was supported by the. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So these two trips were supported only by our NGO, which covered these financial expenses regarding the renting the car and staying at the hotel in Semi City was covered by each person. So, and unfortunately, we didn't get the support from the Kazakh government, so it was like a private initiative, NGO initiative. So, and this year, Center for International Security and Policy is doing like a research, which was with the support from the Henry Boyle Stiftung, is a foundation which based in Berlin, and in this research they also will support travel to the villages for this research. So I'm going to travel to the villages this July, actually.
Wow, are you going to travel again together with Togzhan Kassenova, or just on your own as a part of your individual research?
On my own. Yes, on my own, because unfortunately Togzhan now in Washington, D.C., so she won't be able to join me.
Okay, and coming back to the.
But,
yeah.
I just wanted to say that that first time was the hardest when we traveled in 2019. Last year when we traveled and visited the families which we visited first time, it was, we met each other like relatives. We had tea, had like we met like relatives. Yeah, it was very warm meeting, and I'm sure that this year, of course, I will try to find new families, to meet new people, but I look forward to seeing the families which I already knew.
But what is the purpose of several trips? Why did you decide to travel several times to the same families?
Well, I think it's the main is like a personal connection, because we became friends and we have a connection via WhatsApp, and we talk to each other. And I have another idea which I've learned from Hibakushes. In 2019, when I was at the first committee in New York, there was a forum for NGOs, and one American NGO made a presentation that they together with the Japanese NGOs during last 10 years, they brought approximately 1,000 hibakushes from Japan to New York, to UN, to US universities, and these hibakushes share their personal experience. So I think it's a great idea when a person who suffered from nuclear bombing or nuclear tests can share his or her personal experience. And we actually planned last year to bring a victim from nuclear tests, or survivor, as we say. We don't say victim, but survivor from nuclear tests in third generation, to bring him to the NPT review conference last year, but it was postponed, as you know. So, and this is important to travel and to meet with these families again and again. First, don't lose the connection, and second, well, we became friends. And thirdly, for example, we met Mr. Dmitry Veselov, who lives in Simi, and I suggested him to help us, and suggested him to travel to New York and share his personal story. And I think it's very important, because when we read, as researchers, diplomats or politicians, when we read papers, and we know everyone knows that about nuclear weapons, right? From books, from research papers. But I think it's important also to see it yourself when you see a person who suffered from nuclear tests, and when you listen to his or her personal experience, personal story, it's another story. It's not like just a research paper and you theoretically know what will happen if you use nuclear weapon, but you see the people who suffered from nuclear tests, and you understand how awful this weapon.
And what was his reaction when you suggested him going to the NPT review conference? Like, was he happy about the opportunity to share his experience, or was he frightened, or maybe a little bit afraid of going somewhere and sharing his experience about nuclear testing?
I think he was I'm sure he was quite enthusiastic. Of course, he was like a bit, how to say it in English, nervous that he doesn't speak English, and but I told him that we will organize an interpreter with the support of our Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I told him how Japanese NGO works, and that it would be great if he could help us to start sharing our stories in Kazakhstan. So yes, he was quite enthusiastic, and we're still in connection, write each other, so follow each other.
And do you think Kazakhstan government supports this kind of idea of like promoting the harmful effects of nuclear testing?
Yes, I think I even don't think, but I know that Kazakh government supports, because, as I mentioned earlier, we planned to bring Mr. Dmitry Veselov to New York for the NPTU conference, and I wrote to MFA, and our permanent mission in New York supports this idea. They already was going to book the room to organize a side event with his participation. But as you know, everything was postponed, and I think that next year we'll have an opportunity to have this side event.
And
so yes, answering your question, yes, Kazakh government supports.
It's actually really great. I think it's very important when government actually expresses the support towards such such initiatives and actions. And I'm really curious, like when you invite this man to the NPT, he talks about his story to people like diplomats and experts, but he won't really talk to like just public, normal people, like who are not so much in the topic. How do you think? How is it possible to actually convey his message to wider masses of people, not only experts and diplomats?
Yes, good question. Again, learning experience from Japan. We planned also organize not only a side event at NPT REFCON, but also we were working with several US universities. And last year, one university, which is Columbia University, they supported the idea to invite students of Columbia University and to learn of Mr. Dmitry Veselov. So we worked on this year. We have not only side event in New York, because traveling 10 hours only for one side event is not sufficient.
Yeah.
So we also was working on organizing kids like speak on not only at UN but also at US universities.
Gotcha. I think it's a really great idea, especially regarding the fact that US still hasn't ratified CTBT. And I think if you promote the idea of harmful effects of nuclear testing, probably there will be some changes in public's opinion regarding the CTBT maybe in the future. So I think you're contributing to like even a bigger goal, like which is connected to the treaty. Yeah. Amazing.
Exactly.
And you told me that you're also doing the research within your NGO and that's why you're going there for the third time. And before you said that the first two times were about Togzhan Kassenova book. So can you maybe explain more about the research that you're going to do within your NGO? So what is this research about?
You mean the current research?
Yeah, the current one, yes.
The current research is about, as I see it, it would be like a first chapter about the history of Semipalatinsk, former Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. The second part will be about the consequences for people, for ecology, for environment, for their health. And the third part will be about what Kazakhstan can do, and which is also very important, what international community can do and how international community can help Kazakhstan to overcome these consequences from nuclear tests. I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
Sure, yeah. So my question regarding your current research and these kind of researches, are there a lot of researches on survivors of nuclear testing in Kazakhstan now, like in a wide, like an international scholarship, in Kazakh scholarship? Are there many articles, books about that?
Well, I think there are several, but I'm not sure that many.
So you do feel like there is a lack of such research, and that's why you also do it?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I think that survivors of nuclear testing, it's a very crucial point to research for people who are doing their work in the nuclear sphere, and I also haven't seen that many actually. So it's really great that you're trying to contribute to this scholarship. So thank you for that. And now we'll get to more specific questions regarding interviews themselves. So when you were going for first time to villages nearby Semey, how did you find families who were actually willing to participate? Like, did you just knock the door and say, can we just ask you some questions, or did you arrange it in advance? Like, how did it work?
Well, when we traveled first time, we actually at each village I worked it in advance. I connected to the to the hospitals at the villages and asked. So when we came to each village, I'm talking about the first trip. We visited the hospitals and the doctors. They helped us and showed us like families to which we could interview. So the first trip was with the help of local hospital.
And was it easy to get these families to participate in the interviews? Were they actually willing?
Yes, they are quite. Yes, they are quite open, but at the same time, they were. I felt like from them disappointment that researchers come, interview them, and nothing changes. So they were complaining that foreign researchers come, take them interview, and then they complain about the local environment and social issues, but nothing changes. So there was like they were open to answer our questions, but at the same time they were like a bit tired of all these interviews.
Oh, and what are the main?
This was my feeling.
And what are the main like challenges that they face now? Like, what are they complaining about mostly?
They complain that that government do not pay much attention to them. They complain that, for example, if there is like a complex issue with the health, they cannot solve it in their village or even in Semey. They have to travel to our capital Astana, or they have to travel to Almaty. So I mean, they have to travel to big cities to treat their kids or themselves, and this is a challenge for them. And they complain that the money government provide is not enough. So.
And how do you think how researchers can help them?
I think researchers have like a soft power, raising these issues, talking about it, draw attention of our government, of international community, and this will help. Not immediately, of course, but I think it will work.
Like it's a long term, right? And when you were coming to the Semey, especially when you were coming to villages, especially for the first time, how did you prepare like to interview people you didn't know? Like, did you prepare some questions together with Togzhan and your other colleague, or was it just like a natural conversation and you were trying to come up with relevant questions on the spot?
Well, of course, they were prepared like a basis questions, several questions, but then we were flexible. We were just talking to the people, and we were coming to them with small gifts, with chocolate and tea. So, to establish the connection. So yeah, this is we tried. But one family, for example, there were a woman. She denied to talk to us, and she didn't explain why. I think she just didn't want to talk about it.
So Alimzhan, you were saying that there were some people who didn't want to. There was a woman who didn't want to do interview with you, and I totally understand that such interviews are very troublesome because the questions involve issues related to health, to families' grief. So it's a very sensitive topic. And so my question to you, like, how did you balance out between actually find out the truth and asking people the direct questions, and between being ethical, enough not to offend those people that you talk to?
Yes, you're right. It's like sometimes it's difficult to find the balance. But now, thinking and reminding these two trips, I think that we didn't feel that we had to find this balance. It was like we felt sympathy to each other with this family, and they were quite open. And the woman who I mentioned, she was the only one person who rejected us and denied to give interview, and it's quite understandable. We totally understand it. But other families, they were quite open and, if I may say, talkable. So we were answering our questions quite open, and we didn't felt in that cases that we have to find like a balance. Of course, we were very polite and asked questions in a polite manner. So they were. But I think the second issue that to answering your question, that they already I don't want to say that they did get used to that questions, but I think they understand that we want to share their pain, their problems, and they shared their stories with the hope that it will help to get the situation better in Kazakhstan and in general in the world.
I see. And you said that they were very open to you, to your group. And I was curious, I've been reading some books about victim studies, and there were cases when the researchers were foreigners. Like they had more problems with actually interviewing, survivors or victims, like in different kinds of disasters and topics. How do you think, like the fact that you were from the same country, that you were also from Kazakhstan, like did it somehow help you to, to get along with these families?
Yes, I think it's certainly helped because firstly, we talked we used one language. It was Russian or sometimes Kazakh, but mostly Russian. And secondly, they already knew that we understand the situation from inside, that we're not just coming from another country for a couple of weeks and then leaving them. And they knew that we have this, we will have this connection for future. So it helped, of course, that we can call each other with any problem.
Yeah.
Or text to each other, So
yeah, I think it's very helpful, especially when you establish this personal connection. And did they maybe, like you said, that they had experienced a lot of interviews like that before, with other researchers? Maybe they mentioned like they had some case with a foreign researcher that they maybe didn't like, the situation where they felt uncomfortable with the foreign researcher.
Yes, they mentioned once in one village that they didn't like the case that some, I think, Japanese, if I'm not mistaken, researchers, it was like not recently, but some time ago, came and took analysis like their blood, and then went, and they were offended like that these researchers even didn't share the results of their study to them. So they said that we felt like, how to say it in English, like not human, but like cattle we use this for some experiments. So it was not pleasant to them.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
They share this experience.
And I think it's just overall very offensive, right? Regardless of nationality of researcher, I think sharing results is very important, right? And when you when you left those families and you said that you're in touch with them, did you also share the results of your work, some news regarding the interviews that you were taking with them from them?
Yeah. Of course, you know that Togzhan had one publication, and she shared this publication with the families who mentioned the stories which she wrote. And we are in contact with, as I said earlier, with Mr. Dmitry Veselov. Actually, I talked to him yesterday after our interview. So yes, of course, we share.
Yeah. And what was it like to you personally when you were listening to this, like I believe very difficult stories of their lives? Like, how was it to you personally? Was it hard to listen to them and try to sympathize?
Well, first trip was very hard, because when you hear the stories with small child, with the son who committed suicide, with a man whose wife and children died from cancer, and other stories, you feel like you want to help them, but you cannot do that. And when you see them eye to eye, it was very hard to stand these emotional feelings. Sometimes I write poems, and after the first trip, I wrote a poem in Russian about this trip, that I cannot help them and my feelings from this trip. If you're interested, I can share it with you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm very interested.
Yes, and the second trip was much easier because emotionally was much easier because we already knew each other, and with the families who we met secondly, it was already like I told you, like relatives. We met each other and we had tea and just talked. And, yes, and we were ready to that situation already because first trip we didn't know what to expect. Of course, we knew theoretically, but when you face it personally, it's different.
Yeah, much different probably.
When you see how they live, you enter their house, you see everything, and they share their stories. It's like, yeah.
And did you have maybe one story that impressed you like the most? Maybe from positive, maybe from negative perspective, like something that actually left like something in your heart.
It's hard to say that the only story. They are all were very impressive, and I can shortly share with you that, for example, one guy in Semey, he told me that he looks like normal, but he doesn't have teeth, and he's not tall. He's like below average, his height, and he has some problems with his neck here. So he has to lie down every 2 hours to give a rest to the neck. Otherwise, he will have strong headaches. And he told me that that he decided not to get married, and he made a decision not to have children because he feels fear that this disease can that his children can get this disease. So, and it was very painful to hear. And other stories, of course, that when we talked to old men who told us that he lost his wife and his son because of cancer. And another man shared the story that his son, when he was 15, committed suicide. And this village we visited, there are a lot of young guys and girls who committed suicide. It was like, yeah, maybe because of this depression that they heard and felt every nuclear test, because they were close to that, and maybe because of that. So all these stories, yeah, very hard. It was very hard to hear. And in another village, they were a family, and we visited them twice, the first time and the second. They had 5 daughters, and one daughter they lost at age 6, I think. And another daughter, she doesn't have 4 fingers on one of her hands. She is very young, and she like already understand it, and she hesitates it. So when I saw her, I was thinking like how she will be living in future with this. Yes, it was very, very hard. And another daughter, she had a cancer when she was 9, but now she is okay. But they complained with me that they have to every year they have to check, and they can do it only in capital. But they because medicine, the doctor said that their daughter doesn't have cancer already. The government, from that moment, government doesn't cover the costs just to follow, to check, how to say it in English, to follow that the cancer will not get back.
Oh, yeah, so, the recidive, yeah.
Recidive, and they have to cover it on their own.
So, and they're probably financially impossible, right?
It's it's very hard for them.
Yeah. And do they have any mental support? Like you're talking about such a pressure, physical and mental, that these families experience. Do they have any mental support, maybe from government, maybe from social services, or they just rely on each other and that's it?
They have social support from the government, but it's not like much. And from another side, like not to draw you this picture with only dark colors. From another side, if you meet these people and you don't know their problem, and you just meet them in the street, or maybe just talk to them on another topic, they are quite like look happy. They love life. They live their life. And when we ask them, do you want maybe to leave this village to move to Astana or to Almaty, to big cities? They say no, because it's our earth. We live here. We were born here. We love this place, and we feel proud that we live here. And because there are beautiful places, and they love it. This Kazakh steppe. And when you talk to them on other topics not related to these issues, they look happy, and yeah.
And you said that they feel proud because it's their land, but do they feel proud that that the nuclear weapons were tested for so many years nearby their land? Like, do they feel even suffering? Do they feel this patriotic feeling that, wow, okay, nearby we had a very important weaponry program going on, that made Soviet Union the great power? Like, do they have this kind of narrative in their thinking, or not so much?
No. They absolutely do not support this, because big land, big square was poisoned, and they lost their parents, children's relatives, grandchildren's, and they understand that this disease, their children and their grandchildren can get these diseases in future. And of course, they do not support absolutely this, but they say that yes, it's already history, and they understand that it happened. But if they had a second chance, they wouldn't support it. No, never. And because it was like a secret program.
Yeah.
For one time, they didn't even know what's going on. So yes.
And
from another side, they told me one man told me that it's already not blaming Soviet Union, about this nuclear program. And he told me that it's already, we have questions to our own government, that we have 30 years gone, and what the government did. Of course, government did, but not enough. And I agree with him that government could do much more. They did it for now.
And once the information about testing was unclassified, did they did the government organize some events to raise awareness about nuclear testing among these people? Like, how did they know? Okay, the information got declassified, but did the government teach these people what actually was happening and what some health effects that they might experience? Like, were they taught about it?
No, they told me that Soviet government and Kazakh government at that time, they didn't do that. They just said, okay, all nuclear tests went underground and they're safe. And you know the history that that one serviceman from Chagan had a phone call to Olja Suleimanov and told him that even they had nuclear tests under the ground, it's not safe because gas goes out, radioactive gas. And after that, from that moment, Nevada Semipalatinsk movement was born and protests started. And it's great that Olja Suleimanov and Nevada Semipalatinsk, they used this momentum, build the momentum, and pushed the government to close the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. Because local people, they supported it. And one man who we visited, who lost his son when he was 15 years old, he works as a teacher at school, and they have like at school like a small museum to this Nevada Semi movement. And he showed us the pictures from that moment, and how ordinary people send their money to this Nevada Semipalatinsk movement to support it. So yeah, it was widely supported by local people in all the villages.
And how much are they aware now about nuclear testing? Like, can you say that they're like professionals in understanding what radiation is, what nuclear test is? Like, do they know a lot?
I think they know, but not enough. Not much. They just know that it's dangerous. But still, you know, when even Semipalatinsk nuclear test site was closed, local people who lived around that polygon, they went to the test site and were and digged it for the metal, you know. Because they had to do it because they need money to survive at that time in early 90s. And a lot of people died because of that.
Yeah, wow, because they didn't know the radiation was there. Oh.
And still today, I think that we still need to like widely tell people that it's still dangerous to visit the polygon. Because when I traveled to Atomic Lake 3 years ago, I think 3 years ago, and it was hot summer, and I saw that people swimming in that lake, you know, trying to get the fish from that lake, and and sell this fish in the city or other villages. So I think they know, but they don't care, and I think they don't care because they know not enough. And even if they and even if they don't care, here is the issue for our government to make sure that no one can enter and to get to that lake and not get the radiation.
But if people get there, it means that the government doesn't really do a good job in securing the place. Yeah.
Because water itself is safe. I agree with that, yes. But the land around the lake, in some places, I forgot how to call this. The thing which measure the radiation.
Dosimeter.
In one place, the dosimeter says to you that it's okay. You make several steps to another place, and it shows you that 20 times dangerous than normal. So it's it's better not to go there.
And I don't know, is there such a like maybe there's not, but I'm just curious, in the villages where you went, do dosimeters show any dangerous radiation, or in villages it's clear for now?
Sorry, someone ringing the door. Can I
Sure, yeah, no worries. Sure.
Sorry. So in villages it's okay, and honestly saying, I think we didn't measure with the dosimeter in villages, but when we traveled earlier to the former nuclear test site, yes, it's dangerous, and because of that, because the soil, it migrates because of the wind, and every time you have to check is it dangerous or not. Remembering our trip to that atomic lake, it was like cognitive dissonance that we came to that lake with the safe costumes, with the mask. And when we saw like children swimming in that lake, I'm laughing now, but it's awful.
It's scary.
It's scary.
Like really, really scary. It's like every time when I see when people travel to Chernobyl, and there are like many excursions to Chernobyl, and you actually can go there with dosimeter and see the place yourself. Like every time when I think about it, I'm like, what if you make the wrong step? Like, what if you're not lucky enough and you get the dose, you know? And that's really awful to think of, especially when you know what radiation does to your body, even the small doses.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, returning to victims, I'm just curious. You said that they are not so much aware of nuclear testing and just a nuclear topic in terms of like in technical terms, but I'm curious, are they, I know that Kazakhstan is one of the champions now of promoting disarmament. Do these families support the disarmament movement, or they just, you know, don't care maybe for now because, you know, nuclear tests don't happen and, you know, why should we care even?
I think, yeah, that people who are not, who don't work in this sphere, they generally don't care. And even in Astana, when I'm invited like a guest lecturer to give a talk about nuclear disarmament, I found out that even in Kazakhstan, some Kazakhstani students, like, you know, this coming young generation, some of them don't know that we had this former Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. And wow. I was shocked, yeah. So even in Kazakhstan, we have to work. The country which suffered from nuclear tests, even in Kazakhstan, we have to work. We need to work with our coming young generation to give them this knowledge.
And what do you think is the best way to give the knowledge to young people? Like how to disseminate it in a systematic way, you know? So it's not just like a couple of people know, but like a lot of people actually aware of it.
I think maybe it's a good question. I think to promote it in school, and universities, to share this information, documentary movies about this. And there are good educational programs which I saw have Japan and Netherlands. Their NGOs bring young students, or even from school, to Geneva, to Vienna, to New York, to UN disarmament fora, and teach them that how UN works and how disarmament issues promotes at UN. And of course, we have in Kazakhstan unique opportunity to show them the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. When you travel from Kurchatov by car, 1.5 hours to the zero ground where the first nuclear tests were conducted, and you travel to that place more than an hour, and all day, this trip long, you say, this land, you cannot live there here almost forever. And of course, any person will be impressed and make sure that this will never happen again if he, in future in his career, he can influence on this decision. Because when because it was like a different program we launched with our NGO 2 years ago. We invited young foreign interns who worked at the embassies here in Astana, and we brought interns from Germany, Italy, and Switzerland to the Semipalatinsk test site and showed them the museum in Kurchatov, the ground zero, and then we traveled to Sinei. So they were this 2-day trip. They were very impressed, and I was happy that at the end they told me, Alimzhan, be sure we are for nuclear disarmament and we are against nuclear weapons. And their future diplomats, who knows, maybe future ministers of foreign affairs, hopefully. So.
Yeah, and hopefully they'll make their countries, you know, to change their view, I guess, on nukes.
Yeah, especially Germany.
Yeah, especially Germany. You know, when within the families that you visited, were there some representatives of young generation, like those interns, that maybe were, you know, inspired and hurt by their experience living next to the polygon and being affected by radiation? Like maybe they after that decided to, you know, pursue their careers in disarmament or nuclear engineering, so in related fields. Have you met such people?
No, during these 2 trips, I didn't meet these people, but I told you about Dmitry Veselov.
Yeah.
He supported the idea to travel to NPT review conference and share his personal stories, to leave his job, you know, in CNA and travel just to promote nuclear disarmament. And we were very, grateful to him that he ready to spend his personal time to this important issue. Yeah, so of course we have these people.
It's great. Yeah, I was just, you know, really curious, like whether there are some younger generations, you know, because I mentioned if I were like living in nearby the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site and I had, you know, maybe some problems in the family because of that, like I would probably, you know, be even more inspired, like to work for disarmament, you know, to stop all the nightmares that nukes cause. Yeah, like that's something why I was asking. Yeah. Okay, and you know, just finishing up, I guess, not to take more time from you. Can you maybe comment on whether this research and this trip was, you know, somehow difficult to you, like, and why do you keep doing it? Like you said that you're going for another trip and probably going to, you know, do more research about that. So was it difficult? And if it's so, why you continue doing it?
Why was it difficult? It was difficult, emotionally. It was difficult.
Yeah.
And it was difficult financially. It's still difficult. And but why I'm continuing doing it? It's a good question. Originally, I'm not from CNA, but this issue touches me, and I think if I started doing this job, and if I have this opportunity to share their stories, and in Japan there is an NGO, I remember now, called Soka Gakkai International. It's a religious Buddhist NGO, one of the biggest NGO in Japan, I think. And when I talked to the director, he visited Astana a couple of years ago, and he shared with me that when he was young and he was working at that NGO, they made like a 10-year program collecting interview from hibakushas, and they published it in 80 books. All these interviews collected.
Wow. Yeah.
So, and he said that it was an important job, and I agree with him to keep their memory and to give it to coming generation to share their memory. And I think we have to do the same in Kazakhstan, to collect these memories and to share their personal stories, that the consequences from nuclear tests, not from research papers or books, but when I have a goal or a dream, better to say goal, to record the interview on a video and to keep the memories on video. So
yeah, maybe make like a movie.
Yeah, some movies or documentary interviews. Like in Yekaterinburg, we have this museum. We visited in the memory for Boris Yeltsin.
Yeltsin Center.
Yeltsin Center, and there is a room where you enter, and they have like big screens where some people share their memories about Boris Yeltsin, and it is recorded on video, so you can see it and listen to them, and it's very touchable. And at that time, I thought it's a good idea to make the same interviews about the survivors from nuclear tests.
And use them in the museum, for example, like the museum you talked about.
Yeah, they would be great. That would be great.
Yeah.
To build a museum in Astana to make this room.
Yeah. Like, and I think this is such a good goal, actually. And I think for a lot of people, it's probably quite hard to get to the Semipalatinsk, to Simei or to that area, but it's much easier to get to Astana, and it will be much easier to promote the consequences of nuclear testing while like making it interactive in the way that you said. And I think the idea with interviews is great, and it's really the point you made that research papers or books are good, but younger generation probably is not going to pay too much attention to it if they're not like becoming an academic people or they work in this sphere. But like other people who don't even know about nukes a lot, like probably such museums and movies, YouTube videos, like that, even Instagram pages, Instagram pages with short interview, that also could be an idea to promote it in a more modern way, like more technologically to reach the younger generations better. Yeah. It's really interesting. I actually would be also interested to do something like that, maybe in a more like media fora. Yeah, not like maybe from scientific point of view, but actually to reach out to people. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. We can think about it. If you need my help, I will be happy to help actually. Yeah. Okay. And the last question to you for today. And what would you advise and recommend to researchers like you who are also going to research the survivors' lives? What would you advise them, like when they start this research, what they should think of, what they should consider, maybe of their first steps?
Good question. Well, I don't know what to advise. To read the literature about this region, about the people, not only from the professional side, but also about the region, the people where this research is going to travel or interview them. And the most important, I think, advice, it's not like an advice, but it's what I understood, that it's the interview and the research the person does can be better. It's regarding any job, actually, when you take it personally, that it's not something that happened to someone, but when you take the issue personally, that it happened to you, and you want to share this to other people, and it helps you to go deeper and more effective, and maybe to get the result and high quality. I think so.
Yeah. Thank you for advice. And thank you for participating and coming to my podcast. I'm very grateful for your participation, and I hope that maybe we will, work on that someday together, because I'm also super interested in the topic. And yeah, and good luck on your future research, and hopefully you'll get more funding, so it will be less, financially burdensome.
Yes, thank you for inviting to this podcast, and therefore thank you for the opportunity to share our experience and plans for future. I hope that, and I'm sure this podcast will be useful to maybe students or researchers who are interested in this topic.
Good morning to you, Togzhan. Thank you very much for participating in our EchoThemOut podcast, and I'm very grateful to have you here today. Before we start our conversation, I just want to briefly introduce you to our audience. Togzhan Kassenova is a senior fellow with a project on international security, commerce, and economic statecraft at the Center for Policy Research, State University of New York, University at Albany. And she's an expert in nuclear politics, weapons of mass destruction, non-proliferation, and at the prevention of financial crime. So, Togzhan, before we start talking about your research, can you maybe briefly also explain your research interests and what you do on a daily basis in terms of your profession?
Thank you so much for having me on this podcast, Ksenia. It's a real pleasure to be here with you this morning. My interests span across two different fields, but they also overlap. My primary interest is in nuclear politics and non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. But I'm also, over the last few years, I started building expertise in financial crime prevention, which relates to questions of anti-money laundering, countering terrorist financing. And at the overlap of these two fields, I spend quite substantial time now on working on issues of proliferation financing controls. Proliferation financing controls is something related to how do we make sure that proliferators, right, state or non-state actors, do not get access to global financial systems when they're trying to pursue illegal programs of weapons of mass destruction. So these are some of the key topics I'm working on.
Thank you very much for informing us about that. And today we're going to talk about your research about survivors and people and families who suffered from the nuclear testing back in 20th century when Semipalatinsk polygon wasn't yet closed. So before we get into more details, can you maybe talk about the background of your research? Why did you decide to do the research on that topic?
Thank you for this question. It's always nice to look back at my own journey and observe how my interests evolved over time. So I got interested in nuclear topics when I was pretty young. I was about 20 years old, and I was starting a PhD in politics in Great Britain. And I chose a topic that was already on a nuclear issue, and it was actually on US-Russian cooperative threat reduction, but that allowed me to build up my foundation on nuclear issues. And after finishing my PhD, I wanted to look at the case of my own country, Kazakhstan, and look at how decisions were taken about giving up Soviet nuclear weapons that were left in Kazakhstan after the Soviet collapse. And so, I was this political scientist, a specialist in international relations. I wanted to write a very academic book about, testing all these different IR theories, why countries give up nuclear weapons or why they decide to develop them. And that was the initial idea. But the more I looked at the story of Kazakhstan, and the more I met people from the region where Soviet nuclear tests took place, the more I recognized that if I'm going to tell only the political diplomatic story, that would be only half of the story, and that what truly matters, and maybe even matters even more than any politics or any diplomacy, is the fate of the people. It's their stories, it's what they went through and what they continue to go through. And so a whole other part of my book was born in my research, and I devoted a lot of time traveling to the region, speaking to these people, working in the archives, reading memoirs, and yeah, that completely changed the mission, I guess, of what I was trying to do with my book.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned now that you've used different methods like archival research, trips, interviews, and reading the memoir. What do you think are the most crucial methods for such research that you did?
I think people, the direct participants of events are probably the most precious carriers of information. And I think it's important to talk to them, both because they have direct experience, but also it's almost out of respect, right? It's about giving them the platform, giving them the chance to tell their story in their own words. And I'm not a trained, I'm definitely not an ethnographer, and for me it was also a learning curve for, because before I was used to interviewing only politicians or technical experts, and but these types of interviews of direct participants or direct survivors was the most meaningful, the most moving, and the hardest part of the research. So I would say people number one, but noting, of course, that memories are subjective, and it's a fine balance between listening to the stories, but also using other methods to balance or to double check things. Archival documents are a fascinating trove of information, but again, one has to go with an understanding that certain things were written in a certain way because officials were trying to present a certain narrative, maybe, or certain things were not written at all, and so there are some gaps, and so I would say with archival materials, again, it's very important to double check things, to try to cross reference them, and knowing that it's not that the truth, is 100% presented in one single document. Contemporaneous records, there are some really good books that were published long time ago, and they recorded some, again, eyewitness records and memories, and that's very helpful too, because these are the people who are gone already, and it's good to have some kind of record of what they were going through and how they were experiencing the tests as they were taking place during the Soviet period.
Mm-hmm. And when you were trying to access archives, was it easy? Like, did you have a very easy access, or did you have some troubles with authorities when trying to get this info?
That's again another great question and very practical one. So I'll be very honest with my experience. I had wonderful, just overall, during this research, I just fell in love with the profession of librarians and archivists. That just these people in general are so, I think, eager and excited to help researchers, and it's almost always a wonderful experience overall. I had wonderful experience and access in the United States and Kazakhstan. It was extremely challenging in Russia. So that's the difference, that in Kazakhstan, it was only a matter of just explaining what my research was, maybe filling in an application form. And then I basically had access to anything that was open in the archive, right? Similarly, in the United States, I worked a lot at the US Library of Congress and also presidential archives of different presidents. In Kazakhstan, also, very different archives in different parts of the country, including in Semipalatinsk. When I went to Moscow, I don't know, I think I was maybe naive, and just to give some background, to your listeners. So we're talking about the Soviet nuclear program, right? And the Soviet nuclear testing program. But the issue is that nuclear weapons remain an important part of Russian national security strategy. So everything connected with the nuclear program is a sensitive topic, and especially the part on the program itself, and especially on the impact on the health of people. But I was this naive, idealistic researcher. I thought, oh, if I only do the legwork, if I only, travel to Moscow myself, and so I was able to visit some libraries that were kind of civilian, right? And that was nice. But what I really needed was information from the specialized agencies, such as Minatam, the Ministry of Atomic Energy, or Ministry of Defense. And I just remember so well, I think it was autumn, and it was raining, and it was gray. And it was like in a movie, knocking on the doors of some reception at the Ministry of Defense, that place where you put an official request to get information. And I had all these letters from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where I worked, just like hand delivering those official requests to get access to the archives. And then, of course, I didn't get any access. And then some rejections were in writing, very officially done. And yeah, so that was my experience. It was mixed.
I can imagine how it's challenging in Russia. And you've mentioned that you've worked in 3 different countries about this research, and also you've been doing a lot of archival work and trip. How much time have you been doing this research? Like it sounds like years.
It sounds like 15 years, to be precise.
Wow.
So I never could afford, full-time attention to this project. It was something that I was doing on top of my full-time job, and travels for work, and because this research wasn't something that was required by any employer, so it was basically always my own personal project, and the only discipline I could get was from within myself. And maybe that's why it also took me so much time, but also just due to the lack of time, because it was not part of my job. And yeah, so 15 years, thousands of pages read, I guess, many people I've spoken to, and sometimes I feel embarrassed about how long it took me. But on the other hand, I think that if I would have published this book even 5 years ago, it would be a different book. I think, I finished writing this book when I was ready to finish writing this book. Mm-hmm. And granted, of course, I absolutely know that there are some other documents or some other stories that I don't have access to at the moment, but I am at peace with saying that's the best I could do for now, and please accept it. And but it was a very long journey.
So our audience can enjoy your book already. So it's like you already can buy it somewhere.
So it's available on pre-order on Stanford University Press website. The title of the book is Atomic Step: How Kazakhstan Gave Up the Bomb, but the release date is in February 2022. So that's when it will become available as a physical copy.
I see. Great. Well, I look forward to reading it, actually.
Thank you.
Yep. And now, can you tell me more about the trip to Semey and to the villages in Semey? Like, how was it organized? How did you pick the families? Like, how did you try to, manage it financially? Because as you said, it wasn't your job, so probably you were supporting yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. So I visited the city of Semipalatinsk on several occasions throughout the years. And that was more, for example, there would be maybe a conference, and then I would stay and try to meet people, or sometimes I would just go there whenever I would have a chance to work at the document center there. But the villages was another level for me. So for many years, you know, I've mentioned that I've been working on this research for 15 years, but while I went to Semipalatinsk and also Kurchatov, the formerly closed city where the Soviet scientists used to live and which now hosts Kazakhstan National Nuclear Center, while I went to the cities and the towns that were directly involved in the program or were under direct impact of the testing program, I couldn't bear myself to plan trips to the villages themselves, because the villages are much closer to the former testing site, which means these are the, you know, the direct victims. These are the families that suffered the most. And I think for a very long time, I first of all, I was afraid to see it up close. And second, from what I was hearing from some of them when I would meet them at the bigger conference, or what I would hear from other researchers, is that people in these villages were getting tired from foreign researchers or scientists coming, asking them questions, probing them, you know, for medical research. Some would even ask them to give blood or give teeth and stuff like that. And I started hearing that people are getting a bit tired of all that, because because the conditions there are pretty hard, and you know, visitors would come, and then it's as though, you know, I think they felt a little bit used, and I think that's the issue maybe for this type of research, right? When you are studying maybe a certain group of people, and again, I'm not an anthropologist or ethnologist or anything, and so I don't know how to call it scientifically, but just on a very humane level, that's how I felt. But I also understood that the story would be incomplete if I don't do it. And so luckily, I met Alimzhan Akhmetov, who I believe you are also interviewing on your podcast. Yeah. And we decided to join efforts, and so we went together and more than once, but especially the first trip was just so intense. I never ever experienced the range of emotions that I've experienced during that first trip. On the logistics of it all, yes, it was I'm speaking for myself. So for me, it was just my personal research. So I was funding my own trip. But that's how I felt over the years. Sometimes I would get grants that would help with the research, but a lot of the investment that I've made into this project were just my call as a person who really wants to do it and knows that the story is important. And for me, it wasn't. It was very important to make it happen, even if it wasn't part of my job, so to speak. And I'm very grateful to Alimzhan and his NGO, Center for International Security and Policy, because they organized all the logistics, which can be a bit complicated, you know, because you need to stay in a big city and then go to the villages. And we had some initial contacts, and we would meet these families, but it's snowballing, right? You come to a village and you have maybe one or two contacts, and you start talking to people, and then they sort of start trusting you, or they think about somebody else who might be interesting for you, and it kind of develops from there. But if I may, I also want to just tell you about the difference. So the first trip was a little bit more formal, very, you know, research focused, and kind of, you know, it looked more or less official, I would say. And it was very emotional, because it was just, no matter how much you read, it's very different when you meet people. It's very different when you actually talk to people, when you meet families which, for example, you know, already have tragedies that had happened to them, or you see the kids with very obvious physical disabilities. But our most recent trip was last year, and it had a different vibe, you know, because at least for myself again, it's almost as though I needed it more, not for research, but just because I just wanted to see these people. I just wanted to talk to them again. And it felt like seeing old friends. And yeah, so I'm just so glad that I started going there.
And do you think there is enough support for that kind of research, maybe from Kazakhstan or from other countries like United States where you work probably, or maybe from Russia even, like if you have any connections here?
I did have some support. Just more specifically for the book, I'm very grateful, for example, to one foundation in Germany. They gave me a grant for part of my field research. The whole idea started with the short postdoc fellowship that I did in the Netherlands, for example, where I could develop the idea. That was long time ago. I also could work on these issues while I was doing my postdoctoral fellowship at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. And when I worked at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, they're also part of the programmatic support for the program as a whole, which meant for all of us. I would, from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, I would also say that, you know, it kind of helped me in general as a scholar. So I think, you know, if any researchers are listening, I think there are definitely funders who might be explored, right? That it's, I always believe in applying everywhere you can, but, you know, as my case shows, sometimes you have to put a lot yourself up front. And I know not everybody has this luxury. And yeah, I just had a full-time job and a salary, and I just made a decision that that's something that I wanted to do. And including, for example, hiring a freelance editor, because I wanted to be pushed to have better writing. And so, yeah, for me, it was a combination of funding it myself, but also if I saw any opportunities, I applied for them. And yeah, so it was a mixture. But to the younger researchers who are maybe not in full-time jobs, I would definitely say do not give up and just keep on looking for opportunities. And there might be pots of funding that that are maybe not even that obvious on the surface, but if you keep on looking, something will show up.
Yeah, for sure. It's fascinating. Like your experience is really fascinating, and I'm like, I haven't seen a lot of people who are actually that much dedicated, and it's amazing that you're doing it. And you know, my question about support was also about just maybe not even financial support, but just general support of like Kazakhstan, because I know that Kazakhstan now is a champion of promotion of disarmament. And it's like one of the main agendas. And I know that, for example, the previous president of Kazakhstan, even in a group of eminent persons of the CTBTO youth group. So, so that's why, like, I'm curious whether, like, the Kazakhstan government is interested in that kind of research, or maybe, like, you know, like Russia and Soviet Union back then, they're trying to hide it in a way.
Kazakhstan, you know, the political establishment of Kazakhstan is definitely interested in this type of research because it's both part of our history and it's also part of our national identity. And as you correctly mentioned, Kazakhstan places emphasis on our standing in the global nuclear system as the promoter of nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation. And there is, I think, not even just on the nuclear issue, but on many important parts of Kazakhstan history that were more like black holes before, due to the, you know, to the political environment. And some parts of our history for example, during the Stalin period, for example, I'm talking about Great Famine in 1930s as another example, when there was this program of collectivization and 1.5 million people died in Kazakhstan. And so I think now we have this renewed search for understanding our own history and dealing with the painful parts of our history. And so I would say, absolutely, I think the dynamic is more to let's look for this truth, let's search for it, and so the environment is very conducive. In terms of the support that I feel from within Kazakhstan, I think especially when I was able to spend more time in Kazakhstan during the pandemic, and it wasn't all, rushed between, spending time in Almaty and going to the villages. This period of time when I wasn't rushed and when I was able to talk to my peers about my book, and especially now that it's becoming more tangible, I felt such tremendous support. And I think it's the support of my peers that is especially important to me. And so I'm not talking about friends, right?
Yeah.
Friends by default are supportive, but these are the people who are approximately my age, who are trying to do things in Kazakhstan that are not only, for themselves. So these are, people that are oriented more towards common good, there might be journalists or media people or designers and or people connected with book publishing. And it made me so happy just to feel that there is this genuine and sincere support that is coming from this kind of people. And I think for me, it was just so inspiring, and then kind of made me think, yes, it was all worth it. It just that maybe it wasn't, I didn't advertise the book as much before, because there was no book, but when I felt that I was nearer and I started telling more people, beyond my immediate circle about it, it gave me a chance to see that it's Kazakhstan's own society that needs this kind of research, and that I have that support. And so it was a very nice feeling.
Yeah, I can imagine. And coming back to the interviews and your conversations with victims, how did you prepare for these interviews?
So for each interview, I employed what I would call semi-structured interviews, right? That I always had some questions written out in advance, depending on who we were speaking to. So obviously, if it would be medical professionals, questions would be different. For families, it would be different. And because I was coming to that stage with having read everything that was publicly available, I think as a practical tip for this kind of interviews is to save them for very specific questions. Do your homework before, right? Don't waste your interview time on something generic or something that you can get somewhere else. Go straight to the heart of the matter. But then, as always happens, you go to the interview, you start with your questions, but it's also important to be open to new avenues that open up as you talk to people. So that was kind of the strategy I was using. But yeah, it's very important to prepare in advance and not try to win it. I never do it. I always prepare, sometimes over prepare. Yeah.
So improvise.
Yeah. So I think there is room for improvisation, but it's very important to do your homework as well, because then you just use everybody's time more efficiently, and you also show respect to people by coming prepared and showing that you value your time. And especially with the experts, if your questions show that you know some specific things, you know, that it becomes obvious to them that you've put effort into studying, their level of trust to you as a researcher also changes, right? If somebody comes and asks very basic questions, I think the dynamics is different compared to when you say, oh, I've read in the archives that blah, 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 you know, this specific, could you comment on that? And that just makes it, I think, more interesting and different. Another, I wouldn't say it's advice. I don't want to say I recommend it. I just want to share my experience. Starting from PhD period, and throughout my research career, I've made the decision not to record interviews, which makes it very hard because you need to write key points very quickly. But that's because just psychologically, I felt the difference when the recorder is on or not for all the people, but for some, and which of course has its own challenges because you're trying to write down key things, and then you cannot read your own writing. And but what I do, if I ever use any direct quotes, whenever possible, I always go back to people, try to double check. And but again, that's not something that I would say I recommend. It's just something that I do.
Like your personal principle.
It's not a personal principle. It's just something that I noticed. Maybe it's because that I'm used to working on more sensitive issues. For example, when I was doing my PhD on US-Russian nuclear projects, it just like, it's different, but especially because maybe it was in 2000s, and you know, there was like literally recorder, and so you would push the record button, you know, blinking in red. And I think yeah, very early on, I thought, yeah, people just talk differently, especially officials. And it's very interesting, you know, because maybe the essence remains the same, but just, yeah. But again, it's not that I'm recommending it, because I think for some types of research, precise wording or precise evidence is very important.
Yeah.
And then recording becomes important.
Yeah, especially for those who have hard time keeping everything in their head. Yep, that sometimes is a struggle too as a handwriting as well. You know, when you were asking questions to these people, and the issue and like the experience they had is like, it's so it's tremendously difficult, and you know, because it's associated with like a family drama with health issues, so a lot of things involved. How did you manage to stay, you know, ethical, but at the same time you managed to get, you know, to the nuts and bolts of what you were looking for, like to that truth?
You're asking this question, and I can feel that I'm tearing up, because it's actually quite traumatic. This and that's me, right? I only see them not regularly, and I come as a researcher, and I just cannot imagine for them. So for me, ethics is extremely important. And I think, and that's why, for example, as I've explained, even going there was a big deal for me, because it was about how do I do it in a manner that's respectful to them? How do I make sure that, you know, I'm not pushing for anything that they're not prepared to share or they don't want to share? And I think for me, it was more intuitive that, you know, you start talking to a person, and you just, you first of all, you explain who you are and what you're trying to do. And of course there is, I should say that I benefited from the fact that, you know, I am from Kazakhstan, or that the family of my father is from the region. And I think they could see that it wasn't just some, it wasn't for entertainment, right? It was for something that, you know, and it wasn't for commercial reasons again. It's and then what I've noticed, usually with some people, the hardest truths or the hardest stories for them would come out, not in the beginning, but as they recounted their story. And I think, and I know you read some of my travel logs, but I just remember that school teacher who, was just very calmly talking to us and speaking about the experiences of his fellow villagers and just about the work he's been doing on trying to keep the data on the people who died. And so, yeah, he was just talking about all these experiences that were surrounding him. And then, like, only in the middle, he mentioned also something about his son who committed suicide, and then some more stories that were related to his own family. They came out on the next trip, and so, yeah, I think it's about intuition and just letting the natural flow of how people feel and what they want to share. Also checking with them that is it a story that I can use in my writing or not. And yeah, I'm extremely grateful to these people, and I'm also I respect them so much for many things. And I think I get a lot from going there, because frankly, they teach me a lot. They teach me about resilience. They teach me about grace. They teach me about how it is possible to live even in pretty difficult circumstances. And but yeah, I would say I don't have a formula, but it's just very important to remain conscious about that it's something that they actually live through. It's not some disaster TV show. That's actually real life and real real stories and real tragedies.
And given such a complex stories and such a complex background, and you yourself said that you're also getting emotional when I was asking a question. Like, what would be your advice for a researcher who does research like you did, like to be emotional at the moment of taking an interview, or to try to stay, cool and, with a cool head, with trying, just to be very formal and, just trying to get the information, or there has to be like a balance between emotions and the more formal approach?
I think it's about a balance, because if you're talking to somebody who lived through the experience and you start, I don't know, focusing on your emotions, or it's a little bit, if somebody tells you about something bad happening to them and you say, oh, and this thing happened to me, or if you start saying about how this other person's bad news impact you, right? And I always, in personal life also, I always remind myself that it's not about your reaction to their bad news. For now, the focus is on them. So similarly, in the interviews, I think, I would not be able to hide what I was feeling entirely. And I think it's important to remain kind of human, right? You're not a robot. And I think for them, it's also important to see that people react to their stories, or that they're not just numbers. And but I think to fully break down in front of them, or start saying about how bad it makes you feel, that's something I wouldn't be doing, because it's not about me. It's about them. But yeah, so somewhere in between, not trying to put up a front, but also understanding that it's not about your emotions at the moment. And yeah, in my case, I would, especially during the first trip, I would cry, but when I would be already back in the hotel room. And yeah, but there is also something important I want to say, because we're talking about survivors, and I much prefer to use the word survivors than victims. We talk about the hardships they've experienced, but one of the key lessons that I've learned for myself is that nobody needs and nobody wants for them to be seen only as these victims, right? There is much more to their story than just having suffered from the nuclear tests. And so that's something that I also try to carry in how I think about it, how I write about it. And the experience with the nuclear tests is an important part of their life story, but it's not the only one. Because these people are, they love their land, they're proud of where they're from, they're proud of their roots, and I think it's important that we don't look at these communities just from this angle of, oh, they suffered so much. It's there is much more to their life experience.
And speaking of people, when I talked to Alimzhan, he told me that they complain a lot about the government, that the lack of government support, the environmental issues. So there are a lot of problems that are associated with their lives, and I'm just curious how researchers can help them. Like, I do understand how government might help them, how maybe some foundations might help them, but like us as researchers, what we can do.
We absolutely can do something. And yeah, sometimes Alimzhan has to remind me that we're not Red Cross because, I go into this mode that, oh my God, what can we do? I do think it's important to remember that everybody has their own contribution, that maybe as a researcher, your primary goal is not to organize some assistance, but your main purpose is to tell an honest story. But for myself, at least, I find that it's pretty impossible to just stick, I'm a researcher and that's what I do and that's my main purpose. So of course I do that, but Alimzhan is probably too modest to mention, but we both try, after getting to know the situation there and seeing the hardships, we are both trying to do things on the side, maybe using some of our contacts to, maybe it's as simple as sharing information on some grants that can help, I don't know, for women's entrepreneurial projects, or maybe it's about finding small grant money to help with certain things. So it's not that we can resolve the problems, but as a researchers, especially if you have already a certain standing, your voice matters. First of all, your scholarship matters, because somebody reads your piece and they think about, I don't know, something they're actually able to facilitate or help. I had people reaching out to me from international development field, just asking for more information, for example, or maybe sometimes offering something. Not always it works out due to different reasons, but yeah, I think researchers should not feel the burden of trying to resolve all the problems of the people or areas that they study. But if there is space and to do something else, in addition to telling the correct story, correct to the extent possible, then it will come naturally. You will kind of think of something and you'll try to pass the information on, or you'll try to connect certain people. But yes, for the record, the situation in the villages is very difficult, and yeah, and I always say that we, as people of Kazakhstan and the government of Kazakhstan, are the first who bear the responsibility and need to think about it. And I can see some movement on that front as well. We are starting to see some programs and some more attention, but that's an area that is still developing.
Yeah, and hopefully will develop soon enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I have a final question to you before I let you go to your conference and event. You've written the book, and this is a great way to convey the stories and talk about the issue. But when I'm thinking about raising awareness, I also think not only about young researchers or students who maybe are interested in the topic because of their studies, or policymakers, but I also think of just people just who maybe do something else. They are not so much aware of nuclear testing, nuclear weapons at all. What do you think are good instruments now to convey the stories and to talk the stories to to those people who won't probably search for like scholarship in the Google Scholar or buy a specific book about it? Like, what are some other instruments that you consider for that?
Ksenia, I love how even in your question you use the word story several times, and I think it is about storytelling. It is about how do you get out of your academic straitjacket, right? And that you write your you write your academic books and you publish articles in peer-reviewed journals, but also, if you care enough, how do you use this data that you collected as a scholar, and how do you use it? How do you make it easy to find and easy to absorb and easy to attract attention for people who, as you said, are not maybe spending their day searching for, I wonder what is happening in the nuclear politics. And I think the storytelling skills are very important. It's about different format. It's about writing shorter pieces in more attractive language that is maybe more accessible and that has a storyline. It's a skill that I think we scholars need to work on. And the format is something shorter. Podcasts, for example, I think especially during the pandemic, there is such a boom of people starting to listen to podcasts, and that's more accessible, right? That there are people who are curious, but they're not, they don't know what specifically they need to look for, but then the story comes up on a podcast and they get interested, and maybe that would encourage them to look for more, and then maybe then they will read the kind of the more involved scholarly articles. So storytelling and looking for formats that are more open to general public.
Yeah. Thank you for answering, and thank you very much for participation in our today's podcast. And I'm very grateful for your time. And I hope that I hope to read your book very soon. So next year, and thank you very much for your participation and for your story.
Thank you, Ksenia. Thank you. It was a pleasure and a joy.
So today, thanks to our speakers, we learned a lot about survivors of the nuclear testing at the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site of Soviet Union. We also have learned a lot about how they live now and what kind of research is being done about their lives and about the consequences of nuclear testing. Two guests, Alimzhan and Togzhan, kindly talked to us about the research they have been doing for many, many years and the research they're planning to do in the future. The only thing, I guess, to think of now is what we can do to contribute to enhancing their lives, enhancing the amount of research done about them, and more importantly, how to reach out with this research to wider public. That remains a question. So thank you for being today with us, and I hope you liked it. So if you like the video, if you like the podcast, give us your likes there, subscribe to the channel, and we will be happy to have you among our listeners. And I'll see you next time. This was Ksenia Bernowska in EchoThemOut, Environmental Justice Podcast. See ya!